Leonard. He was on the call for men's basketball earlier this week against Colgate. He was on the call for women's basketball last night against Maryland. Tim, great to have you on. How are you today?
Doing well, guys. The Who is good call for the Artist of the Day. I was just talking to someone actually about best shows in the Dome all time, and they were bringing up the Who, I guess, played in the early 80s, and that was a banger, as the kids say.
I was going to say, you're a little young for the Who.
Yeah.
I saw the Who about 5 years ago, and it was still good. I mean, they were all in wheelchairs, but it was good.
Who have you not seen? Every time Artist of the Day comes up, I've seen them in
Steve,
in
I
concert.
enjoy concerts.
I can tell. You've been to more concerts than anyone I know. All right, let's, I guess, start with the women's game because it's top of mind, and it happened last night. Let's backtrack to the St. Joe's contest. What happened against St. Joe's, and was it just kind of a fluky game, or were there some major concerns for you that came out of that loss to St. Joseph's?
Well, I would say I think it's maybe a little misleading, 14-point loss to St. Joe's. They're definitely a good team. I think they'll be an NCAA tournament team. You guys have been talking a lot about KenPom and net rankings and stuff. One of the sites for the women's game that ranks, it's basically KenPom in the women's game, is a site called Her Hoop Stats. And they have St. Joe's ranked as the 30th best team in the country right now. So some of that is because they played well against Syracuse. But even walking into the Dome that day, I felt like St. Joe's might win that game, just because they are a team that returned 11 of 13 players from last year, 3 all-conference starters, so they kind of knew their identity, whereas Syracuse is a team that's still sort of figuring things out, trying to figure out what the right rotations are. I mean, in each of these first 3 games, Coach Jack has gone with kind of a different first player off the bench, different lineups, and she even was honest about last night's game and said, I feel like I put in some players that I shouldn't have in the second quarter. So that's just figuring the team out in November, whereas when you get into conference play, she'll probably have a better sense of what the exact rotation is and where they can use players in specific matchups and feel good about it. But St. Joe's just shot the lights out, and they made 14 threes. They shot at 54% from 3. And the defense is the biggest issue with their team right now. They've given up 84 points in all 3 of their games to this point. And it's fine against Maryland. I thought they actually did play better last night against Maryland, a lot better than they did against St. Joe's. But they just ran into a team that's a little bit better than maybe people think, and they had a really hot shooting game. And some of that is Syracuse does have some things to clean up defensively and specifically three-point defense.
Yeah, that second quarter in particular, right? I mean, Syracuse got off to a good start, led by 6 after the first, and then Maryland really dominated that second quarter, and that that changed momentum. Terrapins were playing in front the rest of the way, and Syracuse did make it close late, but Maryland had enough, to get it done down the stretch. We talked about some of the things they need to work on, Tim. What were some of the positives to come out of last night's game? Again, Maryland is a really good team, and with 4 minutes to go, it's a 2-possession game.
Yeah, I thought they looked much better last night. And Coach Jack even said, we played like one of the best teams in the country tonight. And if anything, 11-point loss last night was, like you're saying, a little misleading. They were right in that game with about 3 minutes left, and they were dealing with some foul trouble. Isa Verajao never really got into the flow of the game, and she fouled out, only playing about 15 minutes last night as their starting center. But you look at some of the players that you were sort of isolating at the beginning of the year and saying, all right, these players are your returning key contributors that need to step up. And if Syracuse is going to reach their ceiling this year, pretty much all of those players played well last night. Georgia Woolley was great. She came in right out of the gate and scored the first 8 points of the game. She was efficient, and they put a lot of defensive attention on her in the second half, and even were kind of treating her like the Deasia Fair a little bit, like we saw in plenty of games last year. So Georgia, I think, has taken a step up. And then Kyra Wood now has looked very strong in 2 of the 3 games. She's put up basically career-high numbers. Last night was a double-double going against a really tall and physical Maryland team. And make no mistake, I mean, Maryland's the type of program that anytime you play them within single digits, you're doing something right. Syracuse has now played them 7 times, and the only times they've been really close in the game have been the last 2 years when they lost on the road by 2 last year. And then, like we're saying, last night's game was a 2-possession game with just a couple of minutes remaining. And then Sophie Burrows is also one of those players that now a sophomore. She was great in the NCAA tournament game. She's taken on a bigger role this year. And Sophie has been super efficient. You almost look at her box scores and you wonder why she's not shooting more, if they can get more plays designed for her. But she has been in double figures in the last 2 games, and her shot has looked good in the early season.
Tim, since you brought up the name Deasia Fair, I know she was in the house last night. What do you think is her future? Is she a career overseas player? Do you see her getting another shot at some point in the WNBA, or is her size just going to work against her too much?
Yeah, it's a bummer. I feel like she should get another shot in the WNBA. Of course, I'm a little biased there, and Coach Jack even tweeted something to the effect of, it's a bummer she didn't get a second chance in the WNBA later in the season. You know, the Aces was a good team in the sense because they were a great franchise that has a winning tradition, but it was a tough roster to crack. I think if she was drafted by another team, she maybe would have had a better pathway to staying on the team. So I know she's been playing overseas. I think she definitely could have a long career overseas, and that's not something that we should, sniff at, because you can still make some good money. You can go overseas. You can travel the world. You can play basketball for a living. That's really cool, and I think she'll be very successful if that is her career. It'll be interesting. I feel like it's sort of on the outside looking in right now at her getting a crack at the WNBA roster. And maybe it is just her size, but so much of that, we have the same conversation with Syracuse guys going into the NBA. It's just fit, and it feels like the Aces just didn't have a ton of roster spots, unfortunately, and now she's kind of on the outside looking in. All
right, let's switch gears. Let's talk about the men, and, we've seen 2 games and 2 close calls, but 2 victories. So, I mean, what have you seen, I guess? Like, if you're an SU fan, I know a lot of SU fans are a little bit concerned, maybe a lot concerned. What would be your advice to them about, all right, this is what has been the positive. Yeah, this is what they need to work on. But what do you kind of make of what you've seen through 2 games?
I think the positive is they did improve defensively against Colgate, for sure. And I know a lot of fans they can only improve after the Lemoyne game. That's true. The transition defense was the area that popped up against Colgate, and that was definitely a glaring weakness, and Coach Autry said that post-game. That was the big thing that they need to work on right now. But you go back and you think about Lemoyne, it's not like Lemoyne was beating them down the floor. They had 8 fast break points compared to Syracuse's 16 in the first game, and this game was 22 fast break points to 2, with Colgate having the edge. That can happen, and that's what Coach Autry said. So outside of the transition defense was the issue in this last game. And maybe I'm wrong, but that feels a little bit more fixable than if you're just struggling in half-court defense, which was more of the issue against Lemoyne. So I think, Colgate scored 72 points. It wasn't like they shot the lights out. If you clamp down on transition D, then you feel a lot better about your defense here. And, of course, it is still early goings here, like you guys have talked about. So, it's a little bit of a step up in competition in theory for Youngstown State on Saturday. If you look at Ken Pom and stuff, they're a better team than Colgate, and Colgate was a better team than Lemoyne. So I think they played better for sure against Colgate than they did against Lemoyne, and they've got to keep progressing because obviously you're going to get to power conference competition with Texas here pretty soon.
All right, let's talk about SU football here before we let you go. And, we were kind of surprised to see that, Cal's up to a 9-point favorite. We thought they'd be favored because it's a home game for the Bears. Was not expecting a 2-possession, situation there with a 9-point spread. Are you surprised by how wide that spread is?
A little bit surprised. I think you got to keep in mind the West Coast travel definitely has a factor on that spread and making the long journey. In the ACC, the numbers have been actually kind of fine for teams traveling from east to west, but a lot of that is Stanford and Cal haven't won a lot of games in the ACC to this point in the year. You look at the Big Ten, and I don't have the stat in front of me, but I know it's very lopsided in terms of the teams that are jumping 2 time zones, whether it's going left to right, if you're like a USC or a UCLA, or going from the East Coast to the West Coast. So it's got to be some of that. This is an intriguing game for me because we're talking so much throughout this week, as we should, about the run defense and how Syracuse got beat on the ground. And a lot of the conversation is, what do you change with the run defense? Do you move Fadil Diggs around? Do you go to a different formation? Things like that. And Cal on paper is not the type of team that I think is just going to run the ball a ton and run it down your throat. They could, and they probably will run it more after seeing that Syracuse had a weakness in that area in the last couple of weeks here. But Cal threw the ball 56 times against Wake Forest, and they've kind of been like Syracuse where their offensive line is a little bit of an issue. They've allowed a lot of sacks, and I think they have a good defensive front, and their defense is scary from a turnover standpoint. But I just wonder, how much is Cal going to run? How much will that be their game plan? They do have a guy that was picked to be an all-ACC running back in Jaden Ott in the preseason, and I think he's been a little bit banged up and just hasn't been a huge part of their game plan to this point in the season. But they are scoring a lot of points on offense, and I think the Orange certainly have to win the battle of the line of scrimmage. And really, Fadil Diggs, we just didn't call his name much in the last game against BC, and he's kind of the X factor for me. When Diggs plays well and he's impacting the game, Syracuse has more than likely won the game.
This came up a little bit earlier in the show, but just curious to get your thoughts on Thomas Castellanos, getting pulled from the game, and then within the next 24 hours says he's going into the portal. What do you think about that? It's unfortunately, it looks like it might be kind of becoming a trend in college football.
Yeah, so you guys can help me out here. He's played 5 games this year,
he
right?
Has, correct. Yes.
Yeah, he has another year, I guess, or just one more year of eligibility?
I believe he's got 1 year of eligibility left.
Yeah, I think that just wasn't a fit for what Bill O'Brien wanted. You looked at his numbers compared to last year. He set the school record in rushing touchdowns last year with 13. This year he had 1 rushing touchdown. They were trying to make him more of a pocket passer. And I think it's the case of Bill O'Brien just viewed an offensive quarterback being a pocket passer, and Thomas Castellanos wasn't really that guy. So not knowing a ton of it, I just feel like they didn't see eye to eye in that scenario. And it is a little bit of a bummer to think that this is becoming a trend in college football, but I guess it's just one of the things that falls in that category of it's the new reality and we're going to have to get used to it. And for BC, I mean, I don't know if that really hurts them that much. I think a couple people have made the point that it felt like their offense got better when James came in at the quarterback spot because they were just kind of clear on what they wanted to do and they were running the football. So I don't know if it affects BC as a team the rest of the season that much. And, overall, I think this is just kind of the new normal, unfortunately, in college football.
Interestingly enough, he appeared in 5 games his freshman year. So that's one too many. So now he does. He has 1 year of eligibility remaining. Hitting the portal and moving on. Last question before we let you go. Just can you give us your prediction on Saturday with SU Cal? What do you think ends up happening?
Yeah, I think Syracuse could win this game. I mean, I think they probably are. It's going to be another close game. I feel like the matchup is better for this game because of the reasons I said, where I'm not overly concerned about Cal's rushing offense, 108th in the nation right now in rushing the football. So, if it becomes a passing contest between Kyle McCord and Mendoza, who's been solid for Cal, I think you like Kyle McCord's chances. It's just, I think the biggest thing is going to be, can Syracuse protect the football on offense, and can they protect Kyle McCord? And who will we see at the offensive line spots? Because that has been a rotation, and it will continue to be a rotation, according to Coach Brown, going forward. But David Walba is someone who has played more and more snaps and has seemed healthier and healthier. So is that an option at the tackle position that you can count on a little bit more going forward? Because, if they can protect Kyle McCord and if Diggs can get to the passer, which he wasn't able to do against BC, then I think you like your chances. It's kind of what Fran Brown has been saying throughout the season. You got to get some of these big-time players the ball, whether it's OG or LaQuinn Allen, and you got to get Fadil Diggs involved in a game like this. He came to Syracuse to be a game wrecker and one of those guys, and they're down so many players on the defensive front that a lot more pressure is on Diggs, and he's probably getting more double teams, and he's forced to play kind of out of position, maybe at linebacker a little bit. But if they can get him in the backfield, which I think they should be able to against this Cal offensive line, then Syracuse should be in good shape.
All right, Tim. Great stuff as always. Keep up the good work, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Little scheduling breaking news for the Syracuse Orange in football, Steve.
What do you got?
They've added 2 more games with the UConn Huskies, 27-28. So that'll be, 5 consecutive seasons they will play UConn. So 25 is here, right? Next year they'll be here also. 27 will be at Rentschler Field, GMA Dome in 2028.
Okay.
So, yeah. So there you go.
There you go. All right. Tim, breaking news while you're on. Maybe you already knew about that, but